Welcome to Crypto Clothesline. We're glad to be here with you. Hanging out the crypto laundry. Getting all the crypto info for you. Crypto Clothesline. Crypto Clothesline.
Good morning, Amy Rose.
Oh, hi, Avitu.
Hi. Oh my gosh, we have just had the most amazing conversation with Sophie Amat. Does that woman, she's just oozes cleverness. It's a little bit embarrassing.
Without being, might sound offensive, but I had to word this correctly. But her voice is so soothing. It's the sort of voice that I would listen to before falling asleep, like a sleep meditation. It's like, so smooth and relaxing. Not saying that the episode made me fall asleep, but her voice would be pretty good to be, applied in that particular thing.
Yeah. I really wanted to get her on because I know we've had her on in the very early days. She was one of our very first guests on the Clothesline. In the year or so since we've been running the podcast, we've been exploring some really interesting themes like the future of money and the role of women and the role of community. And Sophie's got such a lot to share about all of those things, especially in light of the more traditional way that banking and finance have worked. So it's really wonderful to have her on the show as part of the money season.
And also really exciting to have someone who is on the show and about to go into a bank to talk to them about cryptocurrency. She didn't reveal which bank she's going into, but there's no better person, I swear to God, to go in and talk about crypto to a bank. They would just be like, we'll do what you say.
Where should I deposit my Ripple? La la. Yeah, I know exactly. She's amazing. Well, I've been working quite a bit with Sophie over the last few months, and most recently we had a visit at Perth Airport, and it was really wonderful. Like the preparation that she had done, I certainly wouldn't have gone in unprepared, but my approach would have been so different. And the way that she sort of listed all the pertinent aspects and the way that she guided the conversation, she was just like this sort of meeting engineer. I was aghast, but in the most positive way. I was gobsmacked. I came out of there going, Soph, thank you so much. That was amazing. So, yeah. Awesome.
She's a converter. And she's thinking about how to get the community involved. Just get Sophie on the stage. We sound a little bit like we're obsessed with Sophie. We are a little bit though, just saying.
I think that Sophie has got such a rich history in banking and finance. She's an absolute research. She calls herself a research geek. She loves to do research. She goes very, very deeply into any one topic and then ends up writing articles about it. And has them all over Medium. And she's actually been asked to write for different magazines as a result of her expression. So I think she's the perfect person to be talking to us about banking and finance and cryptocurrency and how the two may move forward together in the future.
Hey, Abidi, I have a question for you. How do you see the future of cryptocurrency and money? What do you think it's going to look like? Do you reckon it's utopian or dystopian?
I kind of have a middle road feeling. I'm a bit bummed out that more people don't know about it and that more people are not jumping on to know about it. It's kind of that catch-22 where unless you've got a fire under your ass, you don't go looking for a solution. And we've got a really slow flame under our bums and we get stuck in that rut of, in our case, not that I'm calling mothering a negative thing, but when you're working and doing housework and, delivering children around to karate lessons in your case or whatever, we get so compressed as women and there's very little space for creative thought and for a creative expression and even to go in and research new things. That's, as you know, largely why we started the Clothesline, because we really wanted to touch the hearts and souls of those women. And I didn't want women to miss out on this opportunity. So my sense is that really the elite, a very elite core group of people will be holders of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. My sense is that the banks will start to rein their own, not terror, I shouldn't say that, but they will start to exert control using their own cryptocurrencies, and that people will trust what the banks are doing. And so I think that effectively it will lose some of its originality, the whole idea of cryptocurrencies being a peer-to-peer or business-to-business or person-to-person transaction, and effectively cutting the banks out. I think that eventually we'll end up with a small group of people that can transact between themselves, and most other people will be transacting, aka thank you very much, Mr. Banker.
Well,
and that bums me out a bit.
I absolutely agree. I think that's how it's heading as well. Hey, what I can see though is if you look at all the other technology adoption, have you heard of the technology adoption curve? It's like, I think lots of people in the crypto space have talked about it, and there's like the innovators, and I think the innovators are like even Satoshi. There's back in 2011 or whatever, there was a tiny amount of people, and then we're in the early adoption stage where there's about 10% or whatever involved. So that's why I think there's not as many people in crypto, because we're in the early adoption stage, but then you get to like 30 or 40% of the majority, and that's where we're moving to at the moment. But unfortunately, I think the banks are going to bring in the early majority, and then see you later.
Well, it's an interesting one, because the banks might bring them in, and it actually might work to the advantage of the person on the street, because they might hear about it through the banks. They trust banks, regardless of all the nasty, pasty things that banks have been up to, and it's splayed all over the media. And we still go back, and as I think Lucas Cullen pointed out rather caustically, that nobody's gone and closed their bank accounts. Nobody's gone and closed, or very few people have gone and closed their Facebook accounts. You know, we learn about all this invasion of privacy and all this abuse, and yet, you know, what do we end up doing about it? Not a whole lot. And that takes me back to what I was saying before about being in the humdrum of daily life and not really having enough time and space outside of all those daily tasks to be able to sit back and say, how do I want my life to look? You know, how am I going to engineer things differently? What is this Bitcoin stuff? However, having said that, if banks bring on the early majority, what it might mean is, if Bitcoin and what have you stay as low as they are at the moment, there's still a very, very good chance that people can get a hold of some cryptocurrency at very competitive prices still, and watch that flower and grow. So that's still quite a positive thing. They need to listen to the Clothesline, Amy Rose. There's nothing more to say.
They will. As soon as the adoption curve, you know, as soon as we get to that middle realm, that's when the crypto Clothesline is going to be like top of the pops.
Oh, where's Molly Meldrum when you need him? Well, it's really exciting that we've kicked off the money season. We're looking at all different aspects of money. We're looking at the future. We're looking at the history of money, and we're looking at where things are with cryptocurrency and the current banking system. That was the topic of our discussion with Sophie Amat today.
Before we go into the interview, should we talk about why we do what we do?
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Crypto Clothesline. Our show is about helping women join the blockchain wealth revolution for themselves and for their families.
Our names are amy-rosegoodey and Abiti Catherine Pass, and we're speakers in blockchain and crypto, and we're on this mission.
We are learning together with you, talking with leading experts in the space, exploring cutting-edge technology projects that are shaping the future for our children.
This podcast is for intelligence and growth, and our values are for peace, harmony, and collaboration on the planet.
Shall we have a listen to our interview with Sophie Amat on banking?
Absolutely. Sophie Amat, welcome again to the Crypto Clothesline.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for coming on to the money series, Sophie.
Oh, yeah. I love to talk money.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Sophie, you've had over 20 years' experience in the banking industry. You're now writing articles for Altcoin magazine. You've got a significant following on Medium, and you're passionate about cryptocurrency adoption, also by helping businesses with crypto payment systems. So can you talk a little bit about money and how it's changing? I know I have a bias because, you know, we know each other very well. So does Amy Rose. Some months ago, you wrote an article called Gandhinomics, and you speak about the creation of Bitcoin as a kickback against the global financial crisis and the collapse of the Lehman Brothers Bank. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I feel that the creativity of human beings is best served cold or warm, whichever way you want to look at it, when we are in a crisis. It's as if we need to really dig deeply within our resourcefulness as people, to find some solutions that help us to, as I mentioned in that article, self-determine. I mean, this is really one of the wonderful aspects of being in a democratic lifestyle state where people have the right to self-determination. And by virtue of that right, they can freely determine their political status, their economic, social, and cultural development. So these are part of the provisions of the International Covenants on Civil Rights and civil and political rights. And I think we've kind of tended to forget that we can actually invest in the capacity to determine for ourselves what benefits us. And I feel that the legitimacy of Bitcoin is really a disruptive technology, perhaps not built with that in mind, but I think it clearly aligns to that principle of how humans need to freely determine their own economic liberation to a degree, free from the state. So the context of the evolution of Bitcoin, I believe, was quite squarely based on the global financial crisis, and it was just a really logical solution for payment transfers. It was pretty understated, I think, if you read the white paper about it. Just a payment system that helps people to transact and send money, or value rather. Perhaps we need to just be clear about what money actually is, but to send value anywhere in the world. And that traditionally has been the holy grail of banks. We've never imagined a world where banks weren't intermediating financial transfers of any nature. And so I think the technologists who created Bitcoin back in, well, it probably took some time, but they released it into the marketplace in 2009 or 2008. The white paper came out, I think it was around October, and then it started to be mined in 2009. So quite clearly Bitcoin performs, to all intents and purposes, a specific role that banks traditionally have performed, which is, enabling the transfer of value between parties, whether they be in the same country or globally. It's quite extraordinary when you think about it. Something so simple, whatever you think about Bitcoin.
Sophie, lots of people say that the old banking system isn't working, and that's sort of why there's been a lot of people move to the cryptocurrency space. But now we've just had, so the old banking system isn't working. Now we've just had JP Morgan and a Japanese bank who are going to be creating their own cryptocurrency, not in the way we see cryptocurrencies in our current community. Theirs is very, very different, but they're still launching their own cryptocurrencies. Do you think that the new way of banking will include these banks having, most banks having their own cryptocurrency?
Actually, I do. And paradoxically, I'm not against it, because I feel that this offers a really exciting opportunity for people to soft launch into cryptocurrencies. They kind of ride in on somewhat knowledge of the banks that they are part of, like, for example, Ripple. Ripple is a cryptocurrency which is the third largest currency if you want to look at coin market cap in terms of market capitalization and trading volume. And it has been used, I understand, by an Indian bank to transmit a $400 million payment exchange. I think it could even be in settlement. I'm not quite sure. Don't quote me on that. But it's been used by the bank. So I think that when we have banks that are willing to create cryptocurrencies which are, to all intents and purposes, not decentralized, so I think people will actually start to ask good questions about the differences between what does this coin actually represent, who does it best serve, what is the transparency of the factors, the inputs that underpin, the value of that particular coin. So I think it is, in some paradoxical way, a helpful tool for people to actually onboard into the cryptocurrency ecosystem. It's a question I've asked myself this weekend and I'm doing some research on. So, yeah, good question.
We recently, for Women in Blockchain, had a number of events which were related to the future of money. And you spoke at length about the banking system and its downfalls. I don't know if you want to touch on those now, but do you actually see then cryptocurrency being the future of money?
Yeah, let me just go back to the downfall of the banks. I think that, back in the day when there were credit unions and that there were community banks, people had a lot more input into what a bank actually invested in, per se. They had more involvement in interest rate pricing on debt products. There was a lot more of a community feel. People actually showed up to meetings, these are the credit union members or perhaps the banking trust members. I know the laws have changed considerably since, but there was a very community feel about the bank. You had access to the executive management team. There was a familiarity in the community. So banks were an extension of that. However, they've become incredibly sophisticated. And I think, Gandhi does talk about we become, if we work with these massive corporations, we become really removed from the very essence of what the bank actually, in effect, is doing. So executive teams basically take on, I suppose, perhaps practices of investing in, for example, securitized assets which have a very poor credit basis behind them. This was part of the global financial crisis. They were selling junk to mutual funds and they knew it, but they could get away with it. And so when we have smaller community organizations that are involved in the exchange of debt, lending, we've got some fun organizations like Credit that are doing that here in Fremantle, even lending between families. You come back to trading, if you will, like banks are there, organizations are there, currencies are there, really to help facilitate the surplus that someone has to be used by somebody else with a profit being returned to the borrower along the way. So I feel that cryptocurrencies have a far better way of coming back to community interaction. It might not seem that way, but I think that there are a lot of microfinancing coins out there that really help people at the smallest possible level to get a sense of caring and humanity and understanding the pricing of their product so that it does reflect the needs of those who are their customers. Overpricing within what's legally able is, I think it's a scourge of the banking system, and they've been able to get away with it for so long. And I think these are questions that we're all throwing up in the air because we want to have more affordable access to debt products, but we also want to have more affordable access to payments between businesses, between everyday people, and that's a constraint, frankly, given the pricing structures that we see with banks.
So do you think the banks will allow, if they have their own cryptocurrency and their own new way of banking, do you think that we'll be able to store other cryptocurrencies in our bank, or do you think we'll just be able to store, the Australian dollar cryptocurrency in our Commonwealth Bank wallet sort of thing? How do you think it's actually going to work? Like, how are the logistics going to work?
Well, let me just put my kind of like the banking hat that I kind of vaguely remember on. I would say that most banks, for good reason, are kind of self-centered. It's got to be about what is going to serve, their return on shareholders. So they probably would, at some level, prefer, let's put it that way, that you really only transact in their coin and store that value if they were to make wallets, etc. I think it would be quite a leap of kind of like financial, economic, social thinking for a bank to welcome a plethora of other currencies into their system. However, like I said before, I think it's a good start. It's the thin edge of the wedge, and it allows people who, if they're interested in cryptocurrencies, to start asking some pretty good questions. Now, this is where banks do not, in terms of information asymmetry, which causes friction in markets, they do not have the mainstay, the power to dictate. So let me just be clear. Websites like CoinMarketCap, and there are others that take and draw data, raw data, trading data, price data directly from digital exchanges, they make that information directly available to the public. So if the public want to check what is the rate for my coin, they will see a whole menu of other cryptocurrencies if they want to go and check out these prices. I mean, it could be that exchanges will also take on a role as well. The more traditional exchanges, we've seen ETFs being offered through NASDAQ, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. So I think the data is where we're going to see the proof. People will become empowered because they will actually have access to the data, and they will see many other coins that are non-banking coins, and they will ask questions.
Can you tell the audience, the listeners, what an ETF actually is? Because, yeah, there's so much talk about it, and then there's this theory that as soon as an ETF is approved, there's going to be global crypto adoption. So what's the significance and what is an ETF?
I've not had a lot of practical experience with them, but just at a high level, these are traded funds that exchanges make available basically to their clients. And it's a diversified portfolio of securities, and securities being shares. I suppose it could also be derivative instruments, but they look at indexes of the performance of a specific asset. So a security is an asset, a cryptocurrency is an asset, if we look at it in that way as well. And then by legitimizing that security, then what happens is that you have the capacity to actually purchase into that fund or purchase the units of that fund, and they can be traded. There are conditions upon which these ETFs are accepted into, say, the Australian Securities Exchange, but that's essentially what they are. They're a reflection of another underlying asset.
So does that mean it's sort of like, I'm imagining there's this company and you buy a basket of like stocks, a little bit of Bitcoin, maybe a little bit of Ethereum, a little bit of this and that, and shares in this and that, and that's your portfolio? And that's like, is that an exchange traded fund sort of thing? Or
yeah, correct. I mean, I think if people want to have a look at BlackRock, they're pretty well-known institution, that runs ETFs. I'm not sure, don't quote me whether they have one on crypto, but, these are just what banks are doing playfully, because that's what the traditional market recognizes as being a product, that reflects what they know. So I guess it's kind of like a soft landing, isn't it, for traditional investors who are in the existing financial ecosystem. They want to see something that they understand, so they'd be willing to get their broker, to purchase into a specific fund, or if they're just like a big investment fund themselves, then they would be interested, in taking units in it and trading and tracking the value as it goes on. To be honest, I haven't really been looking at the data that's come off the Bitcoin, derivative that's offered. Is it in the NASDAQ and then the ETFs that have been offered in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange? But I think, I sound a little bit not knowing, but that's the general concept. I think it really works well for people who have got that mindset and they want something that reflects what they pretty much know. However, as you're aware, you don't necessarily physically have to have that currency. You see, now this is the interesting thing, isn't it? They create these products where you don't need to physically hold the asset. You can actually just trade based on the index values, like the value of Bitcoin or the value of any other basket of cryptocurrencies. So you've got to really know before you invest in these things, why would you want to do that? Would it not be better off you literally going into an exchange and outright purchasing the assets and holding them yourself? You see, I guess this is another tool for soft landing into the cryptocurrency sector for people who perhaps think it's way too dodgy. I think it's so accessible that to do otherwise is probably, I think, more of a risk.
Sophie, to sum up what I understand from what you're saying, what's happening is that there's the development of different products. So up till now, we've been able to go into an exchange or peer-to-peer from person to person and purchase cryptocurrency, so Bitcoin or Ether or any of the other plethora, as you mentioned, of altcoins out there, which are also sometimes ingenuously called, what's the word? Shitcoins. Okay.
That's the one.
But there's lots of dodgy, scammy coins out there, and there's lots of people that have walked off with other people's money having raised funds. So given that cryptocurrency, okay, so to sum up, first of all, we could buy stuff outright. We could buy our Bitcoin just like we could buy gold and silver and hold it physically, except that in the case of crypto, we're holding it in a USB. We're storing it. So in a similar way, we could be buying gold and silver and holding that physically, or we could be trading, we could be learning about trading in the price and profiting from the price movements in gold and silver. So in a similar way, we could be profiting from the price movements in Bitcoin and a basket of other cryptocurrencies.
Correct. And I think this is the really interesting part. There's a complete disaggregation of how traditionally you would enter into making purchases. You know, generally speaking, for some of these kind of higher end derivative style products, you need to go through a broker, you need to go through your bank, or you need to have a profile sufficiently large to actually merit having an account on the exchange. However, in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, you don't. You just basically need to do some know your customer, anti-money laundering questions, and then you have direct access to literally purchase outright assets, digital assets, cryptocurrencies. You know, it's got they run under a variety of different labels because depending upon your intention for them, they're either an asset or they're a source of income.
All right. So given that in 2017 and since we've seen quite a lot of scams, we've seen quite a lot of people walk away with other people's money from the crypto world, it's kind of painted the scene in a not very flattering light. Why should people trust Bitcoin? Why should people trust cryptocurrencies rather than trust traditional banking and the traditional fiat? Even though we've just come through that High Commission on Banking, well, we're going through it in Australia with all of the terrible scams that have come out from the very banking world itself. Even bearing all of that in mind, in the media we see so much downtreading of cryptocurrency and such a lack of trust. Why should people trust crypto?
Well, I feel that it's a question also of philosophy. Why should we trust? I really wonder if people consider, you know, what is the philosophy behind a decentralized currency or coin or means of transfer payment. It means really that those who are invested in maintaining the integrity of that system basically are people like you and I. Admittedly, there can be manipulation within any sort of system, definitely within the traditional financial system. I feel that one has to look at, what is your view? Are you willing to look at the innovation, the technology, and the direct human involvement that has gone into and thinking and technologies that have gone into creating alternative currencies, alternative forms of value exchange? I think that there's something to trust when you look at, somebody maybe at a meetup and that they're actually running part or they're running a node on Bitcoin or some other coin. And when you can connect with that person, you hear the integrity of what they're really interested in doing. They seem to you to be an everyday human being, just like yourself, but they're interested in maintaining the transactions and the integrity of an alternative system, which doesn't involve a centralized authority. I feel it offers us choices. So does choice engender trust? I think it generally does. And also in Australia, of course, the market is regulated. So I think in and of itself, that's also how we build trust, knowing that at some level, the government, just irrespective of how much thoughtfulness has gone into it, have permitted us to have this economic, social experiment within the bounds of some legislation, some regulatory controls. And people generally like that. They like to know that there is some legal overseeing.
So it's kind of centralized, decentralized.
It is. It's kind of centralized, decentralized. People want to know that they're working with it. And for example, if you pick up the phone and you ring up Daniel from the living room of Satoshi, or perhaps, Caleb from Travel by Bit, these people with, Blockchain Australia, they are in communication with the lawmakers because they want this industry to proliferate too. They want there to be robust, self-regulating controls for those who are participating, like the payment processors in this industry.
So, Sophie, it's sort of inevitable that the banking system will change and cryptocurrency perhaps will become their mechanism for payments. But there's some worry within the community that the original intention of cryptocurrency will be lost when these banks become involved. And I'm in that camp too. I do worry because decentralization, the idea of decentralization as big organizations come in, is getting a little lost. And I'm just wondering, what would you say if you're in front of the big 5 banks who are about to move into crypto? What advice would you give them if you had the intention similar to me? I'm not saying that you do, but if you wanted to keep this decentralized nature of cryptocurrency, what would you say to them to convince them to, I guess, save the original intention?
Yes, I would actually encourage them to co-opt with community organisations. I really would. I would encourage them maybe to even apportion a portion of their balance sheet to a social experiment where their bank could actually offer something of more of a community style currency, which we have seen with the more smaller community banks that all got swallowed up in the mergers and acquisitions of the 80s and the 90s, right? So the proof of the pudding is that these banks have had a legitimate role in society. I would definitely encourage them to think along those lines in the interests of giving the customers who choose to stay with them, more preferential, more preferences, more options, more choices. Now, whether they would be interested in that, it comes down to, sheer economics. But I think that they might actually be quite open to a more softer involvement. I don't know how that would look. I know that the Royal Commission is shaking them up extraordinarily. They probably had a reserve anyway of capital to pay the fees. So I don't know it's necessarily going to be based on the economics of running these cryptocurrencies. So I think there needs to be a very strong case built for them to look at what best serves their customers in the most broadest spectrum and get them away from this idea that their currencies are only there to serve settlement transactions or, large-scale transactions between corporate clients. I do know that banks often will have a social agenda, if you can call it that. I mean, you can be quite cynical and say, well, that could mean anything. They've just got to write off to some cause for their marketing and the way they look. Well, sure, okay, even with that in mind, it could possibly be, one inroad. And I haven't really looked at that carefully, but I do feel that there could be some empathy there for banks to look at, creating as a way of restoring faith in their industry.
Well, I think we know who we should send to speak to the banks when the time comes.
Funny you should mention it, because I am going to pitch to a bank a little proposal to help them and their staff, and I won't say which bank, to use Ripple, because their bank is an Australian bank and they're actually investors in Ripple. And the reason I'd be happy to do it for one reason only is to help staff understand the very accessible nature of cryptocurrencies. And like I say, sometimes we have to find the thin edge of the wedge that gets them interested or self-interested. And maybe those thousands of people who work for the banks themselves may be the ones who actually help shift, the internal conversation, because they become very aware and understanding of and they develop critical thinking, comparative critical thinking. I mean, that's what banks like to do. Bank staff like to do. They really like to analyze the data. So I think that's just a really soft and easy way to help them broaden adoption. And I'm a bit of an adoption junkie, and I just really want there to be more people. And sometimes we've just got to accept those who perhaps do not have the same intention, as you mentioned, Amy Rose, as the originators of decentralized coins. Yet we've got to start a conversation somewhere in the self-interests, perhaps, even of those who work in the banks and those who make the decisions, for the shareholders. So,
Sophie, before we finish, you touched on community, you touched on sort of coins that are specific to community. I think it's beyond the scope of and the time that we've got in this conversation to elaborate too much on that. But could you give us a quick overview of how you see local coins or community coins working, if you think they're going to work, or whether you think perhaps we need to stick with something like Bitcoin, or which has got a much more general reach? And also, can you talk about the role of women? Like, do you think that women need to learn about this stuff? It seems that women have a little bit of a tendency to shy away from tech and finance, and cryptocurrency invites you to look at both of those aspects. Is that something you could wrap up in a short
women could
paragraph
definitely benefit. Women could definitely benefit. And I think women are interested because there is a different philosophical underpinning of this alternative system. And it's one that has a far more conversational narrative that we've never had before. People generally don't sit around at a dinner party and think, well, what is the underpinning of the banking system? It just doesn't go there unless, you're interested in the theories of capitalism and, you're really into that. People want to know, well, what are self-deterministic coins? What does it mean to have capacity to issue currencies outside of central banking, authority? So these are very, very novel ideas. And how is it that communities can actually create for themselves, valuable coins, and touching also on community? So yes, women definitely, I feel, are interested, and Women in Blockchain shows us that women are coming to the forefront and becoming self-educated. And then just to touch on communities now, well, communities are really being redefined. I mean, in the tech sector, as you know, Amy Rose, communities are people who just have a shared interest. So the communities can be quite broad and extensive, across the world. And really all that holds them together is an interest in a particular topic. So the open sources, the GitHubbers, they're a community of people. They generally come from all around the world, and these are the ones that helped to launch Bitcoin. They downloaded the source program and started to run it. Local coins, they've operated, and local currencies have operated for a very, very, very long time. Whether they see themselves wanting to go crypto with their particular offerings, maybe, but I feel that cryptocurrencies lend themselves more to global communities that share a specific interest, because there's a far more effective and efficient way of transferring value of the offering, the asset, the value proposition anywhere in the world. So it may not necessarily be needed, if we are like in the Fremantle area, Australia area, looking at having a local currency, for gardening credits, or a local currency for, solar credits or whatever. It could actually be in our interest to hold and trade with something that's more physical or maybe digital, but for those who are actually, geographically specific.
Good luck with your banking presentation. That's huge, Sophie.
Thank you. I'm very excited. And, since becoming a Buddhist, I've really had to swallow and put a lot of, I think, angst about certain aspects of my career and certain conversations that I was privy to, really to the side, and come back to finding neutral language, because I think neutral language is really what helps people of all status, right, become engaged. And I think that's really helpful, because once again, even the executives of an organization are human beings. So there's a way to touch their hearts and to inspire them to basically see beyond, I think, the self-serving interests of, shareholder gain.
It's awesome, though, the thought that basically you're looking at educating the people on the inside, instead of there being that sort of glass firewall or whatever that you can't get through and you can't get the message through. I mean, Amy Rose and I, when we went around to try and open a bank account for Crypto Clothesline, because we actually had the name crypto in our business name, we got turned down, didn't we, Amy Rose, by the Big Four?
It was a bit of a
just
roller
crazy.
coaster.
So one business after another.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie, for coming on today. You've definitely educated us, and hopefully the rest of the listeners enjoyed it as much as we did.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for actually going deep into the future of money. I think it's a necessary one for us to unpack as a society.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Sophie, and we really look forward to hearing what the outcome is with the bank.
Yes, so do I.
Ross Ulbricht is serving a double life sentence without parole for all nonviolent charges for creating a website. Please help free this peaceful man. Go to freeross.org and sign and share the petition.
Sophie has such an interesting mix of this sort of very acute thinking mind and logical mind and all those years in banking and finance, paired together with this desire to change the human condition, to improve relationships, to improve communication. And that, of course, coupled with each and every one of us on the planet dealing with the things that have unfolded in our own lives from childhood forward. She's a really interesting mixture of logic and self-development, I think.
So you're close to Sophie. What bank do you think she's going to go talk to? Come on.
I'm actually wondering. I'm actually wondering. I'm not sure. I'm really perplexed. I haven't seen Soph for a while because, as you know, I've been away. So I don't know. I'll have a ... on that one and get back to you.
Well, I hope it's a big fish.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine it'd be one of the big four, but who knows? It might be.
Fingers crossed. Well, this ETF business, right? This is what I'm slightly confused about, because if people can go in and do, it's sort of like shopping with your grocery trolley online and doing an online shop for assets, and then you've got your basket and you get to get some crypto and whatever, but it does lead to easy access for the rest of the public. But there's going to be thousands of people who buy into cryptocurrency that don't have that understanding of why it exists. And because the community at the moment, they're all trying to build projects that help the world, well, most of them, to solve a problem or do this and do that. But then there's just going to be people who love the money, who want to invest in it, which could be great. Look, I don't know, but I'm just worried that there's just going to be an influx of people who give no shits about the foundation of the whole thing, why Satoshi created it in the first place.
And do you think that would then dilute the effectiveness and potentially even the value if you measure it in dollar value? Do you think that will actually affect the price of Bitcoin and the other sister cryptos?
Oh, I think it'll be great for Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin. But I don't think it'll be great for the future of peer-to-peer electronic cash.
Right.
Like, I don't have much hope for it if that's the way it goes. I think it'll be great for our holdings in whatever cryptocurrency we have, but I'm worried about the rest of the world.
And so I'm also interested in the aspect, if you look at gold and silver and how people have got notes, or I can't quite remember what they're called now, promissory notes. And they say that if every single person on the planet that holds these notes went in and tried to cash them in and come away with physical gold and silver, many people would come away empty-handed, because there's literally not enough gold and silver on the planet to fill all these promissory notes that banks and other institutions have issued. And I wonder if something similar to that could happen with Bitcoin, that if people are doing the online shopping cart basket of crypto jobby, if at the end of the day, if they actually went to try and resell their own so-called assets, whether they would be able to have access to them. And how is this stuff stored? I mean, is that going to be stored in a similar way to the way we're storing Bitcoin and other things now? Or is it going to be held by brokers?
Oh, who even knows? It's going to be shady as though.
It could have been more shady than half the deals that went on in 2017. I mean, this week on Women in Blockchain Perth, we're meeting with Dr. Alison Thompson. She's running Third Wave Volunteers. It's an international group helping people all over the world. It's amazing. She told me that in 2017, this organization raised a heap of funds for them. I'm guessing via an ICO, but she wasn't able to go into details. And then they walked off with them. And the organisation for whom they were raising funds got absolutely nothing.
Shit.
So she's going to be speaking on Wednesday night about somebody who's actually been scammed firsthand. Not just people who've lost money, but an organization that is all based on love. It's all based on humans helping humans. Not 1 cent did they see.
And you know what? This is in every industry, though. There's a lot of when we had that interview on the ABC and we talked about that cotton guy, I regretted talking about him in the context of cryptocurrency, because listeners, that's the first maybe interview that this lady has had on cryptocurrency, and we go and talk about the shady stuff happening. But I didn't put it into context that this industry is like every other industry, especially the banking industry, where there's some shady people doing shady things. And maybe they can get away with it a lot easier in crypto. But
I thought you did really well when you spoke about that, because when she said a listener has just texted in asking about, blah, 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 I'm like, oh, God, who the hell is that? I thought you did fabulously well.
But I don't know. I just thought that I want to present cryptocurrency in a great way, but there is dodgy stuff happening.
Yeah.
But if I was working in if I was doing my usual and I was a building designer, whatever, there's shady, holy moly, in the construction industry, is there shady stuff happening.
Yeah, I think you're right about the fact there's shady shit that goes on in all different industries. And the fact is that, on the other hand, on that ABC interview, that came up as one of the listeners was texting in, and she obviously would have culled the various texts and chosen possibly the most controversial. But on the upside, people love to hear about that stuff, and the fact that you were able to eloquently respond to it. And I didn't actually take it as being a negative slant on cryptocurrency. I think it was just a bit of a gossipy story about somebody completely crazy who seems to have faked their own death. I mean, I think that just makes for interesting news. I don't know that it was intentionally or otherwise. I don't even think it landed as a negative thing.
Yeah, who knows?
I was certainly interested.
Oh, well, you hear the people who, shun cryptocurrency because it's from the dark web. And people buy drugs with it, and then they kill people with it and all this sort of stuff. Like, we don't need any more of that rubbish going around.
No, definitely we don't. And we've got plenty of that going on with the American dollar, so why would you want to do it with crypto?
Exactly.
And the Australian dollar and every other currency for that matter. Well, my lovely, thanks so much for a fabulous conversation today. You can see we haven't chatted for a while because we've got a very long intro outro.
Yeah, we do.
But great fun.
Yeah.
And I look forward to the next edition of the next episode of the Money Season.
It's going to be good. Till next week.
Catch you then. Bye.
Crypto Clothesline.